I'm shivering in the dark, surrounded by boxes and the stale scent of old paint. This isn't some distant memory from hard times. This is now my son's garage, my new room. No heat, no insulation, just a thin blanket and the bitter Alaskan wind slipping through every crack. I gave my children everything. Every birthday cake, every night I stayed up sewing torn clothes, every meal I skipped so they could eat more. And now I'm a burden, an inconvenience. At 71, I've apparently outlived my usefulness. It's Christmas Eve. I can hear them laughing in the warm house, unwrapping gifts I paid for with a pension they promised to help manage. No one even checks on me. That was the moment something inside me broke, but not in the way they expected. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I made a decision. They think I have nothing, but they don't know about the cabin or the land or the will. They don't know I've been quietly rewriting everything, and they definitely don't know who's getting it all. Now you want to leave me in the cold? Fine, but don't be shocked when you're left out in the end. My name is Margaret Hill. I'm 71 years old, a retired librarian, a mother of 3, and a grandmother to 6, though I rarely see them anymore. I live, or rather survive, in Fairbanks, Alaska, where the winters are long, dark, and unforgiving. It wasn't always like this. Once my life was warm, filled with books, birthdays, and baby giggles echoing through a home I built with my own 2 hands and a heart full of hope. I raised my children alone after my husband died in a logging accident when I was just 41. I never remarried, not because I didn't have offers. I did, but because my children became my entire world. I worked double shifts at the library, took on evening typing gigs, and even cleaned houses on weekends just to make sure they had what they needed. Shoes that fit, new coats in winter, school supplies, summer camp. I gave everything. I remember my youngest, Daniel, clinging to my waist one morning before school, saying, "Mommy, you work too hard. One day I'll take care of you like you take care of me." Funny how children say things like that, sweet nothings they forget when they grow up and life gets complicated. Or maybe they don't forget, they just stop meaning them. For years, my kids and I were close. Sunday dinners, phone calls just to hear my voice, handwritten cards on Mother's Day. I used to believe that kind of bond was unbreakable, but things started to shift about a decade ago. It began subtly, with little jabs wrapped in jokes. My daughter Cheryl, the oldest, would say things like, "You're lucky you don't have a mortgage anymore. Must be nice to live rent-free and worry-free." As if I hadn't sacrificed decades of my life to earn that comfort. Then came her husband, Greg. He always rubbed me the wrong way. Slick smile, calculating eyes. He sells insurance, but somehow they always needed help with money. "Just a loan until Friday, Mom," Cheryl would whisper, ashamed. But Friday never came. Daniel married late. His wife, Amanda, is the kind of woman who could walk into a warm room and make it feel cold. She never liked me, said I hovered too much, and called me old-fashioned because I believed in family dinners and handwritten thank you notes. It was Amanda who first brought up the will. We were sitting in my kitchen, sipping tea, when she leaned forward and said too sweetly, "Have you thought about what'll happen to the house when you're gone? It would be such a shame for it to go to the state or something." I smiled politely but didn't answer. I had thought about it. I just wasn't ready to share. My house was my pride, nestled at the edge of a wooded ridge. It had a wraparound porch, a red tin roof, and enough memories soaked into the walls to fill a dozen lifetimes. But what no one knew, what I never told my children, was that it wasn't my only property. 20 years ago, before the land boom, I inherited a remote cabin from my uncle on my mother's side. He was a trapper who lived like a recluse, and no one in the family ever paid him much mind. I kept the inheritance quiet. It was modest then, but over time the land became valuable, especially when a mining company started sniffing around nearby plots. I never sold. I never touched it. I kept paying the taxes and let nature have its way, but the deed stayed in my name, locked in a safety deposit box, a secret, a lifeline. In the last 5 years, my health began to falter. I had a mild stroke, some blood pressure issues, and arthritis that made it hard to get around in the winter. At first, my kids helped. Cheryl dropped off groceries, and Daniel took me to appointments. But over time, the visits slowed. Calls went unanswered. When I asked for help with repairs around the house, I was told to be grateful they still showed up at all. Eventually, it wasn't safe for me to live alone. The stairs were too steep, the heating system too old. I suggested hiring a part-time caregiver with my own savings, but Cheryl laughed and said, "You don't need strangers in your house. We are your family." That's how I ended up in Daniel's garage. They sold my house under the pretense of keeping me close, moved me into a tiny room they barely cleared out, and said I should be thankful they were taking me in. No insulation, a space heater that barely worked, no privacy. Amanda made it clear I wasn't welcome in the main house. Cheryl barely visited. My youngest grandson once knocked on the garage door and asked if I was the old lady who lives in the shed. That hurt, but I didn't let it show. I started journaling every night, quietly under a dim bulb, recording everything, not just the cold or the loneliness, but the slow unraveling of love, the betrayal by blood, the irony that after a lifetime of giving, I had become an afterthought. But I didn't just write. I planned. I called a lawyer, I updated my documents, I rewrote my will, and I made a few very specific decisions that will make sure those who left me in the cold feel exactly what that cold is like. Only this time, not from frost, but from exclusion. It didn't take long for things to get worse. Once I was moved into the garage, the family dynamic shifted, and not in a quiet or subtle way. It was like I had lost my identity overnight. I was no longer mom or grandma, I was just someone who needed managing. Daniel and Amanda insisted it was only temporary, just until we fixed up the basement. They promised that basement, by the way, was never touched. They even stored Christmas decorations and camping gear down there, but no one thought to clear a space for the person who gave them life. The garage, with its cement floor and exposed beams, became my world. There was a cot, a dresser missing a drawer, and a space heater that clicked more than it heated in the corner. Amanda set up a plastic table with a microwave and a jug of water so I wouldn't bother the kitchen too much. I wasn't even allowed to use the main bathroom. Amanda gave me a key to the downstairs guest bath, but she'd lock it whenever they had visitors. "We just don't want people to feel awkward," she explained, fake smiling. "You understand, right?" Of course, I understood. I understood perfectly. Every little decision told me I was no longer family. I was a problem, an inconvenience they had to manage. The first Thanksgiving I spent in that garage still burns in my memory. I spent the morning alone, listening to the clatter of pans and laughter from the kitchen. I thought maybe they'd forgotten I was there, but then Amanda knocked on the garage door with a plate of food wrapped in foil. Not even an invite to the table, just a silent delivery. There wasn't even pumpkin pie. I sat on that cot and stared at the mashed potatoes while the sound of clinking glasses and cheerful toasts floated through the garage walls. No one asked if I wanted to come inside. No one even came out to talk to me afterward. From that point on, I stopped asking. Christmas wasn't much better. I watched from the frosted garage window as the grandkids tore into gifts around the tree. I had knitted scarves for each of them, wrapped with care and labeled by hand, but I never saw them open them. Later, when I asked Daniel if they liked them, he said, "Oh, I think Amanda gave those to the shelter. She thought they were scratchy." Scratchy, handmade by a woman with arthritis, and they were too scratchy. The tension only got worse. Cheryl began calling less and less, and when she did, it was mostly to complain about how hard it was balancing her kids and her job, about how stressed she was dealing with Greg's business setbacks. She made it seem like I should be the one apologizing for being alive. "I just don't have time to babysit your feelings, Mom," she snapped one day. "You should be grateful you even have a roof over your head." Grateful? I raised her on pennies and prayer, and I was supposed to feel grateful for a cot in a cold garage. What hurt more was how Daniel, my baby, changed around Amanda. Alone, he was softer, apologetic even. He'd bring me an extra blanket or sneak me cookies from the pantry, but Amanda controlled everything. She managed the money, the schedule, even what he said. One night, I overheard them fighting in the kitchen. "She needs to go to a home," Amanda hissed. "She's my mother," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "She's draining us, Daniel, emotionally and financially. She just sits out there like a ghost." A ghost. I was right there, listening, breathing, existing, and yet they spoke about me like I was already gone. Amanda started keeping a tighter leash on Daniel after that. He rarely came to the garage anymore, and when he did, it was always rushed, with guilty glances and awkward goodbyes. He couldn't look me in the eye. Even the grandkids stopped visiting. When I asked little Ava if she wanted to come see the snow globes I'd collected, Amanda quickly answered for her, "She's got homework. Maybe next time." There was never a next time. Eventually, Amanda installed a keypad lock on the back door. She didn't even tell me the code. I was officially locked out of the house. My meals were left in Tupperware containers by the garage door, like I was some stray animal. No conversation, no warmth, just the daily routine of silent dismissal. Then came the final insult. One cold afternoon, I found a flyer tucked into the blanket on my cot. It was for Hearthstone Retirement Village, a brochure full of smiling seniors playing bingo and eating tapioca. I flipped it over, and on the back, someone had written in neat cursive, "Think about it. It's best for everyone." No one admitted to placing it there, but I didn't need to ask. Amanda was pushing me out and trying to make it look like a mercy, but I was done being pushed. That night, I reached under the cot and pulled out my old lockbox. Inside were my documents, birth certificate, bank account info, and the deed to the remote cabin in Denali County, untouched, untold. I whispered to myself, "You think I'm weak because I'm quiet, but you're about to learn how loud silence can be." They treated me like a burden, like a ghost, but soon they'll realize just how much I truly mattered and how much they lost. Winter in Fairbanks isn't just cold, it's punishing. The kind of cold that creeps into your bones and makes you forget what warmth ever felt like. That year, it came early. By mid-October, the snow was knee-deep, and the temperature dropped below zero most nights. In the garage, my space heater wheezed like it was dying a slow death. I doubled up on socks, wrapped myself in 2 coats, and still shivered through the night. Then the power went out, not the whole house, just the garage. At first, I thought it was a fuse, but when I knocked on the door to ask for help, no one answered. I waited a few minutes and knocked again. Still nothing. I tried the back door, locked. I walked around to the front, trudging through snow up to my calves. Through the window, I saw them, Daniel, Amanda, the kids, sitting by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa and watching a holiday movie. The lights were on, the tree was up, and there was a roaring fire in the hearth. I stood there for a long time, watching frozen, not just from the weather, but from the realization that they knew I had no heat, they knew I had no power, and they didn't care. I went back to the garage, numb inside and out. No lights, no heater. I wrapped myself in every blanket I had and sat on the cot, watching my breath turn to mist in the air. By morning, my fingers were stiff and swollen. I could barely bend them. I didn't say anything. I didn't call Cheryl, didn't bang on the door. I just sat there. Something inside me cracked, but it didn't make a sound. Days later, I overheard Amanda talking on the phone. She was in the driveway, pacing with her coat half-zipped and her voice low, but not low enough. "She's not going to make it through the winter in that garage," she said, almost annoyed. A pause. "No, she refuses to go to the facility. I don't know what she's waiting for. Maybe she thinks we'll beg her to come inside." Then she laughed, not a big loud laugh, just a small sharp one, like she was laughing at a joke only she understood. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I just listened and folded another sweater quietly. But the final blow, the moment I knew things could never go back, came in early December. It was Cheryl's daughter, my oldest granddaughter, Madison. She was getting married. I'd helped raise that girl. I'd watched her take her first steps, taught her how to read, stayed up with her during sleepovers when she had nightmares. When Cheryl called and said the wedding was going to be intimate, I didn't mind. I assumed they'd still want me there. Then, 3 days before the ceremony, I got a group text from Cheryl. "Can everyone please RSVP for the brunch Sunday? We're so excited to celebrate with our closest friends and family." I stared at the message. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even been told. Later that night, I heard Cheryl's voice on speakerphone in the living room. "Mom doesn't need to be there, Daniel. It's going to be crowded. She'll just get tired, and frankly, it's embarrassing explaining to people why she's in the garage. You know how people talk." They didn't even want to be seen with me, not because I had done something wrong, but because I reminded them of their own shame. The morning of the wedding, Amanda left early with the girls. Daniel didn't say goodbye. He just nodded at me through the car window as they pulled away, dressed in matching navy suits. No one came to check on me. No one even left me a piece of cake. I sat in the garage holding a photo album from when the kids were small. Birthdays, beach trips, Halloween costumes. The smiles in those pictures felt like ghosts now, evidence of a time when love meant something. That evening, I looked out the window and saw fireworks lighting up the sky over the country club where they held the reception. I heard faint music playing. I imagined Madison walking down the aisle. I hope someone remembered to tell her she looked beautiful, but I wouldn't know because I wasn't there, and they made sure of it. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't pray. I didn't cry. I just lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling for hours. I couldn't feel the cold anymore because something colder had settled inside me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't bitterness. It was silence, the kind of silence that comes after a funeral for what used to be my family, for the mother I once was, for the woman they no longer saw as worth honoring. They left me out in the cold, so I left my heart behind right there in that garage. But in the morning, I got up and I started packing. The morning after Madison's wedding, I rose early not because I slept well, I hadn't, but because something in me had changed. I wasn't going to ask for warmth anymore, or kindness, or space at the table. I was going to take back what was mine, not with shouting or drama, but with calm, deliberate silence, the same kind they'd shown me. I started by digging out my old file box from beneath the cot. It was heavy with papers, documents that Daniel and Cheryl had long forgotten even existed. I opened it slowly, my fingers aching but steady. At the very top was the deed to the cabin in Denali County, untouched land, paid off decades ago. But below that, something even more powerful. The house, their house, my house. I had bought it with their father before Daniel met Amanda, before Cheryl married Greg, back when the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and love, not bitterness and control. When Charles passed, we put everything in my name. They never asked. They never checked. They just assumed it belonged to Daniel, and I let them. For years, I said nothing. I let him take over the mortgage, pay the taxes. I wanted him to feel like a provider, a man of the house. I thought it gave him purpose. Now I realized it gave him power he thought he had. But the truth sat in my lap, printed in black and white. I was still the legal owner. They had locked me in the garage of my own. Oh, I nearly laughed. The next day, I called Mr. Blake, my old attorney. He was retired now, but still sharp as ever. "You remember that one we talked about 5 years ago?" I asked him. He paused. "The one with the clause about cutting them out if they ever mistreated you?" "That's the one," I said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "It's time." We met 2 days later in his warm little office near the post office. He reviewed the paperwork I brought, copies of texts, recordings from conversations I had quietly captured on my old phone, even pictures of my living conditions in the garage. I had kept them all, not for revenge, but just in case I ever needed the truth. "I've never seen a paper trail this solid," Mr. Blake said, flipping through the folder. "You've documented everything." I nodded because people forget, but I don't. He drafted an update to my will that day. Every cent of my savings, the house, the cabin, the annuity left to me by my sister, which no one even knew existed, it was all going elsewhere now, to the women's shelter downtown that helped me after Charles died, to my church, which still mailed me bulletins even when I stopped attending, to Ava, the one grandchild who once sneaked out to the garage to give me a cupcake when she thought no one was watching, and to Maria, the housekeeper Amanda had fired last year. A kind woman who once rubbed my feet when my joints flared up and whispered, "You deserve better," before being let go for being too chatty. They would get it all. Daniel and Cheryl, not a cent, not a keepsake, not even a photograph. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because sometimes love has to end before dignity can begin. I moved quietly after that. I cashed out a portion of my emergency savings and arranged for a moving service to pick me up early one morning before anyone in the house was awake. They wrapped my few belongings, loaded them into a truck, and I rode with them to Denali County. The cabin had sat empty for years, but it was clean and sturdy, built by Charles and me with our own hands. It smelled of pine and old books. I stepped onto the wooden floor, breathed in the mountain air, and smiled. There was no heat yet, no internet, and the roof would need patching in spring, but it was mine, all mine. For the first time in years, I felt safe. That night, I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace and made a cup of tea. I sat by the window watching snow fall in soft sheets across the trees. No noise, no voices telling me I was a burden, no locks between me and the world. I was free. I didn't leave a note when I left the house, no dramatic message, no confrontation. I let my absence speak for me. Let them wander into the garage and find only a cot, an empty dresser, and cold silence. Let them realize I had been preparing for this all along. Let them wonder. Let them feel what I had felt, not out of spite, but for truth. The silence that had once made me feel powerless was now the most powerful sound in the world. 6 weeks passed. No one called, no one texted, not even Cheryl, who usually checked in when she needed something, babysitting, a signature on some forgotten insurance form. At first, I wondered if they even noticed I was gone, but then came the letter, a plain white envelope forwarded to the cabin from my old mailing address. Inside was a typed message from Daniel. "Mom, we noticed you've moved out, and we're assuming it's temporary. Amanda and I are discussing listing the house this spring, and we'll need you to sign a few things to speed things up with the realtor. Call me when you get this." No greeting, no concern, no apology, just a signature, just a transaction. It made things easier. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Daniel and Amanda had planned a spring renewal party, a community fundraiser for Amanda's real estate group, held in the backyard of what they still thought was their home. A neighbor forwarded me the flyer. She knew the truth, and she had always liked me better. Join us for an elegant evening of food, firelight, and fundraising in the home of Daniel and Amanda Clean. I RSVP'd anonymously. The night of the party, I didn't wear anything. Nancy just a clean wool coat and boots with good tread. The yard was strung with lights, caterers buzzed about with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Laughter echoed under the stringlit pergola, and Amanda floated from guest to guest, glowing with attention. I stood at the back gate, unnoticed, until Mr. Blake walked in behind me, gray-suited and steady, carrying a manila envelope. He gave me a small nod. "You ready?" I smiled. "I've never been more ready." We made our way through the crowd slowly. People turned, murmured, stared. I hadn't been seen in months, and certainly not since the garage days, but I didn't shrink. I walked tall, chin lifted, letting their curiosity build like pressure in a balloon. Daniel spotted us first. His smile faltered. "Mom?" Amanda turned her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Her face froze. "Excuse me," I said calmly, stepping up onto the small patio stage where Amanda had been preparing to give her speech. I took the mic. "Good evening," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "Some of you may remember me. My name is Margaret Clean. For those who don't, this is my house. A ripple passed through the crowd. Amanda stepped forward, laughing awkwardly. Okay, wow, Mom. Maybe not the best time. Mr. Blake stepped beside me, clearing his throat. Actually, we have something to clear up. He opened the envelope and held up a stack of documents. This home was purchased in full by Charles and Margaret Klein nearly 40 years ago. The deed has remained in Mrs. Klein's name exclusively since his passing. Amanda's mouth fell open. Daniel stepped forward. What are you talking about? I've been paying the mortgage, the bills, the insurance. I nodded. Yes, and thank you for that, but you never transferred ownership, Daniel. You just assumed I had, and I let you assume. A low hum of whispers buzzed through the guests. Mr. Blake continued, Mrs. Klein has made the decision to reclaim ownership and is in the process of removing unauthorized occupants. Legally speaking, this fundraiser is being held on private property without her consent. Amanda looked around, panic rising in her eyes. You're trying to embarrass us at our own event. I turned to her, calm as a winter lake. This hasn't been your home for a long time, Amanda. Not since you locked me in the garage while my fingers turned blue. Not since you laughed about how I wouldn't make it through the winter. Daniel tried to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing this to be clear. I turned back to the crowd. I raised 2 children in this house. I cooked every holiday meal, held every grandbaby. I walked these floors during colic and cancer and grief, and then one day I became inconvenient, a burden. So they shoved me aside, out of sight, out of mind. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the servers had gone still. Mr. Blake handed me a small folder. This, I said, holding it out to Daniel, is a formal notice. You have 30 days to vacate. I've already given notice to the utility companies. I suggest you start packing. Daniel didn't take it. His hands stayed at his sides. Fingers curled into tight fists. Amanda turned, face red and trembling. You can't do this. I am doing this, she scoffed. You're just a bitter old woman with no one left. I smiled softly. No, Amanda, I'm a mother who finally remembered her own worth. I stepped off the patio. The music never resumed. The light suddenly looked too bright, too fake. As I passed the caterer's table, I picked up a deviled egg and popped it in my mouth. It tasted store-bought. Mr. Blake walked me to the sidewalk, and we waited together for my cab. Do you feel better? He asked. I thought about it. I don't know if better is the word, I said, but I feel done, and that's something. He nodded. You did good. The cab pulled up. I slid in, closed the door, and looked back once. Daniel stood on the porch. Amanda was gone. The guests had scattered like dry leaves in the wind, and for the first time, the house looked like what it really was, mine. The phone started ringing the next morning. First Daniel, then Cheryl, then a string of unknown numbers I didn't recognize, likely Amanda's family or friends trying to mediate. I didn't answer any of them, not out of spite, but because I had already spoken my truth, and I had learned the power of letting silence do what years of pleading never could. I heard through my neighbor back in Anchorage that Daniel and Amanda's fundraiser never recovered. Sponsors pulled out, guests gossiped. Some even posted videos online. One went viral the moment I took the mic and calmly said, "This is my house." A quiet, steel-cut sentence, but it spread like wildfire. Amanda's face, shocked, red and shaking, became a meme in a local community group. Someone captioned it, "When the mother-in-law owns the house you thought you were flipping." I never laughed out loud, but I won't lie, I smiled. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail from Cheryl. It was handwritten, shaky, and stained in one corner. Mom, I didn't know how bad things had gotten. I just followed Daniel's lead. I thought we were doing what was best. I'm sorry. Please call me. A week later, another letter arrived, this one from Daniel. I messed up, I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but Ava keeps asking why she can't see you. Please just talk to me. It was the first time he mentioned Ava, the only one who had slipped me a cupcake in the garage, the only one who hugged me without being told to. That stung, but I held the line, not to punish, but to protect. Because once you let someone lock you away, physically or emotionally, you don't hand them the key again just because they say they're sorry. I didn't block them, I just didn't reach back. I moved on. The cabin in Denali became my sanctuary. I painted the old shutters, fixed the leaking roof with help from a kind neighbor, and planted a small garden out front, carrots, potatoes, and sunflowers, just like Charles and I used to. I joined a quilting group in town, all older women, all sharp, funny, and fierce. Some had stories like mine, most had even harder ones. We laughed, we shared, we stitched. Grief turned into blankets, and I gave them to the shelter down the road. At night, I read novels by the fireplace I made. I made cocoa with cinnamon. I slept with no locks between me and the world. I no longer counted the days by who called or visited. I no longer measured my worth by how needed I felt. I began measuring it by how peaceful I was when I opened my eyes each morning, and for the first time in decades, I felt whole. Amanda lost 2 of her biggest real estate clients after the party scandal. Apparently, no one wants to buy a house from someone who throws parties on property they don't own. Daniel took out a second mortgage trying to pay back party costs on a house he would no longer live in. They moved into a rental on the edge of town, smaller, less shiny, no backyard. The irony didn't escape me. Meanwhile, Cheryl went quiet after her letter. I heard through the grapevine that she and Greg separated, something about financial strain, something about emotional manipulation. The pieces were falling, but I didn't cheer because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't about making them suffer, it was about choosing myself. Finally, one spring morning, a knock came at my cabin door. I opened it to find Ava standing there, cheeks red from the wind, holding a drawing in her hands. It was of me and her sitting on a log with flowers behind us. "I told Dad I was coming," she said. "He said he wouldn't want to see me." My throat tightened. I bent down, took the drawing, and pulled her into my arms. "Your dad was wrong about a lot of things," I whispered. We sat by the fire. I made her tea with extra honey. She told me about school, her new cat, and how Amanda always called her too sensitive. I told her being sensitive wasn't a flaw, it was a gift, especially when the world needed more softness. Before she left, she asked me if she could visit again. I said yes, and I meant it because not all bridges need to burn. Some just need a gatekeeper, and I had finally become one. That night, I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the stars blink to life above the trees. The cold didn't scare me anymore because I knew now the worst cold I ever endured wasn't outside. It was in the voices that made me feel small, in the family that forgot I was human, in the silence they wrapped around me like chains. But I had broken them quietly, firmly, without screaming, just truth, just grace. And now, when people asked me if I missed the old days, I said no, because those days weren't as warm as I pretended they were. The warmth came later, after I left them out of the will, after I found myself again. It's funny how life shrinks and expands. In Anchorage, I lived in a house full of people and felt completely invisible. Here, in this little cabin nestled among the pines, I live alone, and yet I feel seen by the world in a way I never did before. Maybe it's the simplicity, maybe it's the silence, or maybe it's the clarity that comes when the noise finally dies down. After Ava's visit, something inside me softened. Because she asked for anything but because she offered something freely, love without condition. She came back a few weeks later, this time with a book she wanted to read to me. We sat by the fire, and she stumbled through the words, pausing every so often to look up and make sure I was still listening. I was more present than I had been in years. When she finished, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you still mad at Dad?" I paused for a moment, then shook my head. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I just learned what I deserve, and that was the truth. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace over poison, and I had made my peace." Not long after, I met with my lawyer one last time. We finalized the changes to my will. Most of my estate, what they had once counted on, was now going to a local shelter for women starting over, women like me. I also set up a small trust for Ava, something just for her, locked until she's older, with a note tucked inside it. Use this when you want to build something kind. I didn't do it out of spite for the others. I did it to finally live aligned with the values I used to preach but rarely practiced for myself. Respect, kindness, boundaries. You can't demand them from others unless you give them to yourself first. The quilting ladies threw me a birthday lunch that year, just a simple affair. Crockpots, lemonade, and laughter that echoed through the community center. One of them, May, pulled me aside and said, "You've got this piece about you, Margaret, like you've made your bed and finally learned how to sleep in it." She was right. I no longer lost sleep wondering if my kids would ever appreciate me. I no longer chased approval in the shape of Sunday phone calls or Mother's Day cards. I had stopped needing applause and started honoring the quiet voice inside me that had whispered for years, "You matter too." Sometimes I still think back to those long nights in the garage, the frost biting through my socks, the silence that felt heavier than any insult. But then I look around now, the garden blooming outside, the fire crackling nearby, Ava's latest drawing pinned on my wall, and I remember that the cold didn't kill me, it taught me. It taught me how to stand still in a storm, how to rise without rage, how to walk away, not to hurt them, but to finally heal me. If there's anything I want people to remember from my story, it's this: quiet strength will always outlast loud cruelty. They called me a burden. I became a boundary. They left me out in the cold. I learned to build my own warmth. And when they tried to erase me from the center of their lives, I rewrote the story, not as a victim, not as a villain, but as a woman who finally decided to choose herself and never look back. What would you do if the people you loved most treated you like a burden? Would you stay, or would you walk away with everything you had left? Let me know in the comments. Do you think I was wrong for cutting them out of the will, or was it finally time they learned that love without respect isn't love at all? Your voice matters? Someone out there is going through the same.